Cool. Hey everyone, my name is Brent White, and Tim Roberts here. We're security consultants at Solutionary. We're going to talk.
Hey guys, you mind keeping it down there a little bit?
We're going to talk to you about hacking web apps today. Kind of an intro. Here's a quick disclosure. So basically, in this talk, it's going to be high level of what we do from start to finish as security consultants. We're going to tell you basically how to get started if you're interested in assessing web apps. Maybe you're a developer or something. You want to make sure that your stuff is more secure. So we're just going to tell you again how to get started and pro tips, things to save you some headaches, things that we've learned over the years. Doing this doesn't automatically make you a hacker. It does take time and practice to get familiar with the tools and what they do.
So the first thing we typically do is after a statement of work is done and we have the contract for a client, we'll have the kickoff call. So the kickoff call is kind of we like to call it the bridge. It bridges the gap between that statement of work and the actual project itself. So doing that kickoff call, that's when you're going to review the rules of engagement, discuss limitations, the scope. Is the application, are there forms that you want us to avoid so we're not flooding somebody's inbox or, taking down a system? Is it in QA or is it going to be in production? So these are some of the things you want to consider when you're looking at the limitations and the scope itself. In this as well, you want to have a list of point of contacts. So not only that, we usually have a technical lead, sometimes we'll have a supporting lead, and then we'll have our engagement manager. But aside from the pen tester's point of contacts, you want to make sure you have a good, healthy list of technical contacts and whoever the sponsor is for the client side.
That way, if you're testing it and you happen to flood the server and kill it for whatever reason, you can call them and say, hey, I broke your stuff. That's always a very fun phone call to have. Just something to keep in mind, at the end of an assessment, they're always going to expect a report. So the more evidence that you gather during the assessment, the better it's going to be at the end. The reason I say that is because I know a few guys, myself included, some of the earlier assessments that we did, you say, oh, I found this, and while you're writing the report, you forgot to take a screenshot or document the whatever you sent and received. So then you have to call the client and say, hey, I need that access back because I forgot to document something. That's also an embarrassing phone call to have. So.
Slides meant to be purple.
Yeah, it does look kind of weird, doesn't it?
For some reason, mine seems to be working better for people than the one straight from Apple.
Yeah.
Give us my shot real quick.
Sounds good.
That's superior Chinese engineering. Something. Did it spot it?
Yeah, that looks better already. Yay.
No.
Yeah. All right.
Cool. Thanks, Adrian.
I have the best number.
So again, make sure that you're collecting all the evidence and stuff that you need so that you're not having to call later to get access that's already been shut off.
So how do you take notes for the evidence? When I first started, I was using like Notepad to paste HTTP headers and stuff like that, and then I would edit it, and that's an awful way of doing it. So typically we use KeepNote. It's a great choice. It's in Linux. It's in Windows. It's on Mac. You can create notebooks, and then you can organize it by vulnerability, by host, by whatever you want. And the beautiful thing about it is you can actually paste screenshots in there. So as you're going, if you want to gather evidence and such.
So you don't have like 30 or 40 screenshot files, and you're having to dig through and find the right screenshot file for whatever you're documenting. It's all just right there on the page, and it makes it pretty simple.
And as you guys are gathering evidence too, it's important to look at the scope, because sometimes we've had application assessments where they will create an account for us if it's an authenticated assessment, for example, or whatever, and that account will only be during the testing period. So it's important that you gather as much evidence as you can during that point instead of after the testing period in which the account's been disabled or deleted or if there's whitelisting or anything like that's going on for a white box type of assessment.
So on this next slide, this is sort of how I group my evidence. So you can do, if you have a few different hosts that you're looking at, you can either group things by IP or if it's one or two web apps, just do it by vulnerability. And I'll go through, and this is keep note again. So you can see something that I do for quick visual reference is I'll change the background color. This would be a critical, high, medium, and so on, however you want to do it. That way you can, for me, it just kind of helps me keep my mind wrapped around things and where I'm at in the assessment.
Also, if you guys ever go off something like OWASP or some kind of methodology, even your own methodology, it's a nice way to organize that. That way you're hitting it every time. Not so much like a checklist, but a good reference point to say, did I test this? Did I test that? Etc. During the evidence gathering, we mentioned keep note, obviously, but make sure you're looking at the HTTP request and responses. Any kind of unscheduled downtime. So let's say you do take down one of the systems, or they end up patching one of the systems, or during the test, which has happened before. It's important to note that in your status updates as well. So as you're communicating with the client, saying, "Hey, I don't have access to this anymore. Is this my fault? Did I lock my account out? Did I take down the system? What's up?"
Yeah.
They can say, "Oh, well, we rolled that out. We wrote out our updates. Sorry about that."
Yeah, right in the middle of your testing, which has happened before. You also want to document if you found a way to create accounts that you're not supposed to do, or you've made changes to certain accounts. Make sure you document that stuff and let the client know, hey, this is a dummy account. I was able to make it, but for whatever reason I couldn't delete it. That way they can go and clean up whatever things you weren't able to clean up.
Yeah, especially like SQL servers and stuff. So if you're creating tables or dumping tables or modifying, make sure that's all in the scope.
Yep. And again, I've seen a few people get in trouble, things like this, for non-disclosure agreements. So if you have an awesome hack or something, don't share it online. If you want to kind of hint at it, make sure that you're sanitizing it so that it doesn't trace back to the client. So just make sure that you're not doing anything silly like that.
You want to make sure that you're also getting relevant and legible screenshots. A lot of times people will just copy and paste code, which is great. But sometimes you want a screenshot to show the proof of concept. Oftentimes you'll see something like this. This is great proof of concept. Yay. I used a SQL map. I was able to compromise a SQL server, but it's an awful screenshot to try to decipher in a report.
Yeah, it's the black background on green text, because it looks big right now, but you got to consider you're going to put that on a document, so it's going to shrink down, and you're not going to be able to read that. And it's just really bad idea to put something on there just make sure that it's legible.
Something else you're doing with these screenshots, you want to make sure that you're truncating data like passwords, for example. If you dump a user database and you've got all their passwords sitting there, you don't want to have all that in the report. You don't need to. You can obfuscate the passwords or just put the usernames or whatever. It gets the point across. If they need the passwords, you can provide that to them at a later time, but consider who all is going to be looking at that report, and also consider if people actually change their passwords or not, or if they're using the same password for their personal accounts, which is often the case.
So on this next screen, you'll see, so the last one, obviously that's terrible. You don't want to have that. So something that we do is we will copy and paste, and then, for example, this HTTP request, we copy it to like a code snippet on the report, and then you can see the username where we highlighted like whatever payload was sent. So we'll highlight that, so when they're going through during their remediation testing, they can basically copy and paste from the report and replay that to see if they fix the issue or not. So those are things you want to consider. When you're giving the client a report, you don't want to just say, hey, we broke this. You want to show them how you broke it. That way they can break it themselves until they've figured out that it's remediated. So
oftentimes the developers want to be able to replicate any finding that you have, just to say, hey, it's still there. And in that way they can do some internal testing before they request the pen testers to retest their application.
Yeah. Something that often gets overlooked, make sure that you're testing every parameter. So if, for example, the username in the last screenshot, that was vulnerable to SQL injection, make sure you're also testing the password or any other parameters for that same SQL injection. don't just say, oh, I found one and stop there, because they're going to want to know, okay, what about all the other parameters? So those are things that you want to consider during your testing so that you're not having to go back and redo the work.
I mentioned earlier about methodology and keep note and stuff like that, organizing it. So make sure that you actually do have a methodology that you're going by. If you're new to the whole offensive security stuff, there's a lot of good references out there. For application, OWASP is obviously one of the more well-known frameworks and checklists to help you out. But something that we want to make clear is just because you have a methodology or you're using OWASP or whatever other testing frameworks, don't limit yourself to those, because checkbox security is not good security. Okay, checkbox security just makes you're compliant. Oh, we did it. So you need to make sure that you're follow through with it. Throw in some real world testing too if the client's open to it, for as far as client side attacks, etc.
Social engineering, things like that, phishing, and so on. So now let's talk about open source intelligence. So anytime we're assessing an application, one of the things that we do is we look online for any sort of digital footprint, or if it's been compromised already, are those credentials out there in Pastebin or somewhere else. Pwnedlist.com is a really cool service. They are always scraping information from data breaches, and so you can set up your own personal searches for clients and go through and sorts through billions and billions, probably just huge amounts of data from dumps, so you can see if something's been compromised. And there's tools like Recon NG, and then again Pastebin. So basically anything that you can look at. I mean, Google is a huge one too. It's very time consuming, but really digging into this, it's amazing what you can find here. And actually, so there have been times. One assessment, I did a search just from the company email address and found active database creds on a development help forum. That they were still active, so we were able to go and compromise that database, and that's actually a pretty common thing. So if you're a developer, it's cool to get help online, obviously, but if you're going to share your database information with someone, make sure you sanitize it, or if you're giving someone temporary access to come in and look at code or whatever, make sure you disable that account when they're done. Don't just leave them wide open, especially if you're sharing it online.
And this goes for your internal stuff too.
Yeah.
So say we're doing like a red team assessment where application is in scope and network's in scope, and you're on site and you've got a developer wiki. Well, a lot of times people don't pay attention to the dev environment and hardening the dev environment. Well, if you're using the same credentials and the same code and the same, whatever, and you've got it on your developer wiki, well, that's a really handy tool for a pen tester to reference and to see if those accounts are still active too.
Yep. There's a few automated tools that we like to use that sort of help with time saver. One of them that I really like is Discover by Lee Baird. You can see on the screenshot just a few of the quick things that it does for you. Recon on a domain or a specific person. So it's very helpful.
There's a few other tools out there. I like to use Harvester, MetaGoofil. There's some metadata gleaning tools like ExifTool and strings, stuff like that. So, even when you're gathering this information during the reconnaissance phase, going through some of the files that you find online or that are on the application itself and looking at the metadata, it's amazing what you can find. Sometimes usernames, sometimes domains, host names, etc. This is just a screenshot of one of the tools I mentioned, MetaGoofil.
So, automated scanning. So why do you use automated scanners? You're supposed to be a hacker. Well, when you are doing several assessments back to back, it's a very good time saver. It goes through, it looks at server settings, it looks for low-hanging fruit, if it's real easy cross-site scripting or SQL injection, default files, many things like that. So it's a huge, a huge time saver. And something that I really want to stress is that just because someone's coming in and running automated tools, that is a vuln scan. And a vuln scan is not a penetration assessment. It's a vuln scan.
Can everybody say that together? A
Vuln scan is not a penetration assessment.
Well done. Very interactive on this.
Great job, guys. So, again, I hear people say this. I hear people try and sell this all the time. Yeah, we'll do a penetration assessment for you. And all I do is run a vuln scanner. And so to those that say it is, there you go.
Yeah, so if you go in and say that it's a new client and you're like, hey, can I see your last pen test report? And they give you a stack of documents and it's nothing but Nessus and Acunetics outputs, there's probably a problem. So, in addition to the automated stuff, it's something to consider. Black hat hackers have a lot more time than a pen tester who has 2 weeks to test your application and write a report. So consider that as well, what you're getting and what you're paying for. A lot of companies out there that offer offensive security services, like Solutionary, they have like the advanced persistent testing. So they'll have, it could be like several months for an assessment. So you may even get more out of that depending on what you're looking for. But that's one thing that automated tools help with, is to just kind of get that, like Brent said, that low-hanging fruit. And it's a real quick overview of this. It's really noisy, so if it's a black box assessment too, that's something to consider.
Yeah, make sure that the client is whitelisting your IP. Let them know that we're going to throw a lot of traffic at you for a little while. So, unless see if incident response is part of the assessment. Most of the time, we tell people we don't have time to really try and go and bypass your web application firewall or IDS, IPS. Because we're having to do this so quick, please whitelist us, which helps. So, go ahead.
Yeah. So a few of the automated scanning tools, good ones. Nessus is commonly known, but IBM AppScan, it's handy. It's an automated tool, and it's just kind of point and click at times, but there's some handy macros and stuff in that tool.
It's very customizable.
Yes.
Some more, you're going to hear us talk about Burp Suite Pro quite a bit. I love that tool. There's a lot that's built into it. Cool thing about it is that it's actively developed on, so people are creating plugins for it all the time. And I'll talk some more about those in a minute. And then Nick too.
Oldie but a goodie.
Yeah, it's old one, but it's constantly updated, and it's a good quick scanner. It looks at CGI, default pages, several things. And it's very customizable as well.
So let's say you're using something like WordPress, WP Scan. It's built into Kali. That's a handy tool for testing WordPress. There's a few other tools out there. So if you're using like Joomla or anything like that, or Drupal, there's specific scripts out there that'll help test that. Some of them come pre-installed with Kali. Others you got to kind of search for yourself. So.
And Cold Fusion. I love when I find Cold Fusion. Cold Fusion is terrible. Here's a screenshot of Dirbuster by OWASP. This is just a brute force tool where you can feed it a dictionary of files or directory names. So if they aren't linked to in the application and you can't find it by spidering, this is a good way to go and find them manually. And it takes quite a bit of time considering how big of a dictionary you throw at it. But it's a good one if you're hitting a wall or looking for something specific. Again, that's not linked through the web app. This is a good way to brute force.
Pro tips. So when you're getting started with this stuff, don't just install your automated scanner, plug in the URL or web service or whatever, and click go.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you're adjusting it and that you understand what the scanner is doing. Some scanners like Nessus, for example, they have that safe checkbox where it won't test any exploits that may take down the system, right? So if there's a denial of service test in there, you want to see, hey, is this denial of service? Is that just testing to see if the patch is there, or is it actually trying to launch a denial of service attack? And is this the production environment? If it is, consider the loss and implication of taking down that system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't want to flood the host, so again, adjust the number of threads. That way you're not, flooding it, taking it offline by accident. Tim mentioned this a little bit earlier, but you always want to ask the client, hey, are there any functions or pages that you want us to avoid? Like, is there a contact form that if we hit this, some poor guy is going to get 1,500 emails, in an hour and have to go through, sort through them? You want to make sure that you're documenting those and putting those in the automated scanner so it's avoiding those particular pages or functions. Another issue I found too is sites that have custom 404 pages. It always comes back as 200 OK, but it's really just their default, hey, this page isn't there. So in the automated scanner, if it's doing a spider, every single thing it sends at it, it's going to say, hey, I found that page, but the page isn't there. So now you've got thousands of false positives that you've got to sort through and delete. So something that you'll want to do right off is look for that custom 404 to see if you're getting a 200 OK response, and then put that in the scanner so that it knows anytime you get this page, that means it's not really there. And then if it's an automated, not an authenticated assessment too, you want to make sure that you configure those credentials in there. And then again, when it's finished, you have to make sure that you're going through each response and getting rid of false positive. You don't want to just, hey, here's everything from the scanner, and it says that there's SQL injection, but it's really just a weird error that's getting back, and it's not actually there. So,
yeah, I don't think either of us can stress enough how important it is to test and validate the findings from automated testers, or automated scanners, because you're getting a dump of all this junk, right? And half of it, you're like, oh my gosh, they're vulnerable to 15 different SQL injection attacks and blah, blah, blah. And it turns out it's just the same parameter being fuzzed. So always go back and double check that stuff. And once you're ready to go and you're finished with the automated portion, then, you're ready to go.
Yep. Then again, just tying up on the automated stuff, document once you go through and you're doing your false positive verification. When you do find things that are actually valid, make sure that you document those, all the things that are legitimate, so you can tell the client, here is what was found. So, in kind of going off again, transitioning from automated scanning to manual testing. Let's say that the automated scanner found cross-site scripting. Okay, so you don't just want to say, okay, well, it's there, I verified it. How much further can you take that? Can you actually bring in malicious code and send that to someone? Is there, unauthorized redirects or SQL injection? Don't just verify it's there. How much further can you go? Can you actually take that to where you can get a shell and get shell access through that? So you want to test those things.
And just to add on to that, one of the other things that we see a lot of for cross-site scripting is just the alert.
Yeah,
pop up.
Alert.
It's like, oh, okay, great. You can pop up an alert. Go further and push yourself further. Get a document cookie or try to inject something onto the site. Do something other than just making a pop-up box. Because, it expresses that this is vulnerable, but, they're paying for a penetration assessment, not a vuln scan, right? And that's what vulnerability scanners do.
Yeah, like throw in there a keylogger, like the JavaScript keylogger. XSS Sniper, I think, is the tool. And you can throw in a keylogger. That way, you're showing the value. When it gets up to C-level executives and you're trying to help the client get more money, more of a budget to help fix these things, they can say, well, why do I care about a box that pops up that says 1 or XSS? But if it's a box that you can say, well, because of this, they were able to insert a keylogger for anybody that visits that. Now, that's a whole different story for C-level. It helps to show the importance to them of why they need to give this department more money to fix these apps.
And, the red team, blue team mentality, it's, you guys are working together, right? So, whoever's doing these assessments, these pen tests, you want to work with the blue team to help them and say, hey, what is the problems that you guys are seeing? What are some of the things the developers are doing or that executives aren't buying into? How can we help and how can we prove that? And doing it and pushing it to more than just a screenshot or a proof of concept, and actually applying those tests, I think helps a lot.
So manual testing, again, you want to look at the application through a proxy. Again, Burp Suite Pro, mentioning that again. This helps you look at everything, the request, the response. You can fuzz those things. You can see where it's going to get information. You can just kind of tear the app apart. You can look at all the comments and the source code, or their developer or debug comments in there. Sometimes we've actually found legitimate credentials or database names, things like that, in the comments. So if you don't spend the time doing that, you're going to overlook some potentially easy information to get.
And say you can't get Burp Suite Pro, or the company's not going to pay for a professional license. There's other alternatives out there. You just got to look. We list OWASP app and Peros as an example, but there's tons of web application pen test tools out there.
Fiddler, I think. Fiddler is another one.
So
yeah, it's an old one.
Review the server response. So, he mentioned that earlier with the errors, but also in that, look at the headers and see if the version information is contained in there. And if it is, hey, now you've got the version, now you can go to Google and look up exploits or vulnerabilities for that particular version.
Or searchsploit, and say it's an old Apache version, searchsploit, and then Apache, then the version, and it'll come back with all of the known exploits for that particular version. So
perimeter fuzzing, there's a lot of tools out there for fuzzing, but we mentioned Burp again, Responder, and some of the built-in functions in Burp Professional that you don't see in the free version. It's got some nice lists that you can feed it. You can feed it custom lists. There's built-in lists for cross-site scripting, for SQL injection, etc.
And so a few high-level things that you want to look for: cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, SQL, LDAP injection, local and remote file inclusions. And so if you're not familiar with what those things are, again, unfortunately, if we had more time, we could explain that, but there are so many free videos and tools to really dig deep into what those things are and how to exploit them, as well as how to mitigate the issues with those.
Earlier we mentioned that Burp Suite has these files that you can plug in there, the lists that are available or that you can download. There's also other places you can make your own list. You can Xenotix by OWASP. It's a nice tool that we use sometimes for cross-site scripting when you have a huge list. There's tons of tools out there.
Yeah, and so basically with that, it's the same as if you download password lists, you can also download lists that have cross-site scripting attacks or SQL injection attacks, things like that, and where people are always posting their new attacks that got through a web application firewall or something. Those are things that you want to parse and keep adding to your list so that you can kind of be up with the latest attacks. So this is a screenshot from Burp Suite Pro, and you can see in orange, you can actually specify in the sniper attacks, you can actually specify what parameters you want to focus on. And then say, for example, if you're trying to see P3, if that parameter is vulnerable to cross-site scripting or SQL injection, you would just focus on that, and then you would feed it the list for SQL injection or whatever, and then it shows you all the responses. Then you can compare those and see if anything might be worth looking at. So
let's say you do find a SQL injection vulnerability. Well, how do you exploit it outside of the scanner, right? SQL Map is an awesome tool, so make sure that you're saving your headers. You just plug it into SQL Map and let it go.
Yeah.
I think it's already built into Kali. There's other tools out there. If you're not comfortable with SQL Map, I think there's some GUI tools out there for SQL injection as well.
There's SQL Ninja, Barbecue SQL, or
Havage.
Yeah, quite a few different tools out there.
All right, back to the manual testing stuff. Is sensitive information being passed through the request? Again, you want to make sure that the session ID is encrypted, that you're not able to reuse that session. You want to see how it handles session management. So opening up another browser on a separate system, from a separate IP and logging in with the same credentials that you're logging in with your test system. Now, did it boot you? Is it letting simultaneous sessions on one user? That's one thing to look at. Look for also the internal IP. Sometimes you'll see that the internal IPs are disclosed in the headers. So this is sensitive information you want to kind of keep an eye out for that is blocked when people are attacking it.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, look in the comments. You'll find some valuable stuff in that, and JavaScript. So just make sure you're really kind of combing through everything. And then I know we've been really throwing a lot of stuff at you, so here's a little break from all the text. Break over. So you want to look at authentication. So are there pages and functions that you could see when you're authenticated that now you're logged out and you have those URLs, but you can still get to them? So authentication bypass, is it forcing you to log in, or can you still see those things? This sounds pretty basic, but is there an actual log off feature? Some websites forget to include that. I'm not sure why, but if that's not there where a user can terminate their session when they're ready, you want to let the client know, hey, you guys need to add this. And as Tim mentioned, can you have multiple sessions of the same user at the same time? Might not be a big deal for certain websites, but if it's like a bank website or something, that's something that you would want to have, a feature that you would want to have. If you're logged on, as soon as someone else logs you on, it kills your session. You can say, well, why do I keep getting logged out? I'm the only one that has this login information, and then that might be something that somebody could use to figure out that their account's been compromised. So, password requirements. Can you set the password as ABC123? That's a terrible password. We always recommend at least 8 characters, upper, lowercase, and a number and a special character. Makes it a little harder to brute force those. So make sure that you're looking at the password requirements. So
yeah, the length of usually like 8 is probably a minimum. But please also, this is a password that we see a lot. Whatever season it is, it'll be like winter 2016.
Yeah, that's terrible.
That's an awful password.
That's the new password one.
Yeah. So don't do that, please.
Yeah. One more thing you want to look at as far as authentication too is what's the password change process? Does it require you to put in your current password with your new password? That's sort of the standard of what you want to do. Some websites just, you can say change my password and it doesn't require your current password, and you want to report that.
You all see a lot of uppercase season, year, put less of bang on the end. Exclamation mark, because that pretty much fits all the complexity requirements most people end up putting in place.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we always try. We'll try like summer 2016, capital S, and then summer 2016, capital S with explanation at the end. And it's crazy how many people use that.
Yeah, you'll see like the one complex character, right?
Yeah.
And hacking's always evolving, right? And it's this cat and mouse game where you're trying to keep up with your standards and your policies and such. So just trying to stay at the heel of it, I think is great. And one way to do that too is don't let your password policy have like a dictionary word in it. Oh, well, you can put winter in there, or you can put fall or summer or kitty boo boo, whatever. It's
dog name.
Yeah, your dog's name, stuff like that. So you don't want that in there. And I know it becomes annoying, and the end users complain, oh, the password, I can't remember all these stupid passwords. I like to recommend the haystack approach to that. If you've never heard of the haystack, it's where you have a series of complex characters that you use for all your passwords. And then you just tag that onto the end of whatever your password is. So let's say for Marshall, you have, M@R, and then you put your haystack beside it. So it's an easy way to remember that. So all you have to do is memorize that series of complex characters, then add that to your password all the time.
Yeah.
And I would change that,
Or password phrases too.
Right.
Passphrases are good. Like, log me into my Marshall account, please, or something log me into my bank account, or something along those lines. That way, whatever it is, like sign me into Walmart.com. That way, whatever website it is, you can remember it. That's probably a bad example, because if you figure out one, then you could figure out all your other passwords, but you get the idea.
Looking at the host, we mentioned looking at the version numbers. The same thing for whatever their backend SQL database, etc. Looking at those version information, then searching for payloads and exploits. That's kind of like the standard, right? Okay, well, it's vulnerable. Now I got to figure out how to exploit it. Yeah. That's one thing that automated tools are crappy at, for the most part. There's some out there that will actually exploit it and try to pull and loot data from it, but that's kind of your responsibility as a pen tester, and that you're not just a vulnerability scanning tool. You're there to actually test it, and hey, is this legitimately vulnerable? Yeah. Is there a admin portal? Do they have port, whatever, 2085 or like cPanel? Are they using cPanel? Are they? Is it logged down? Do they have default credentials? Are they using admin? Mm-hmm. Things like that to look at.
To add on to that, something that you'll want to report to, again, if cPanel or Apache Tomcat or something is available to the public, that's something you want to tell the client, hey, this is a really bad idea. Lock it down to specific IP if it has to be available. That way, somebody in China or whatever can't get that and brute force it and eventually get into your stuff. So.
Aside from just the headers leaking version information too, a lot of times you'll see the splash screen for the web server. Mm. Here I'm using IIS7. Okay, thanks.
Thanks for helping me tailor my attacks.
Yeah. So don't do that.
Again, for looking at the host, you want to look and see what HTTP methods are available. I've actually been able to compromise quite a few hosts just because PUT was available. So I put a web shell on there and did whatever I wanted to. And then when I was done, I deleted it. So it's kind of a bad idea. I know some web apps are sort of built around those functions, and I've seen people that do it correctly, where just because PUT is available doesn't mean you can actually do it. So if you look at the options and it says PUT is enabled, make sure you test it. Don't just say, okay, PUT's enabled. See if you can actually put a file there. And then you want to look at things, like directory traversal. That's still pretty popular. Shell shock, heartbleed, all these popular attacks that are out there. It's amazing how much people don't patch stuff. So check those things out. And then again, Nmap, what ports are open? Do they have SMTP open to the public?
Is Open Relay on, and can you start, is client-side attacks? Well, sweet. Now I can just start spoofing emails and sending social engineering attacks. So
yeah, so you want to look at those things instead of just the web app as well.
So, we were talking about that. As far as the SSL TLS, testing that, well, how do you typically test that? You can look at the certificate and see if it's self-signed. You can see what it's using. But to test the ciphers, one of the tools, or a couple tools that we use, SSL scan is a great tool. Mm-hmm. Test SSL for Windows, executable you can run. It'll test for Beast and Crime and Poodle and stuff like that too. So, it's a nice handy output to show the client.
And I know Qualys has an online tool, but that's something you might want to be careful about, because I know they log things and then they'll actually show publicly unless you check a checkbox to not show it publicly. So if the client is okay with it, or if you're doing something you shouldn't be and you don't really care about that, I know the Qualys tool is good. Otherwise, we recommend the SSL scan or some of the other ones that Tim mentioned on your own box. So, file uploading features. There have been several times where there's been a web app where you can upload, say you're putting a profile together and you can upload a profile picture. You just take .php and then add .jpg on the end of it, and it doesn't actually look at the file. So now you just uploaded a PHP web shell because it didn't sanitize that input. Now you've got a shell on the script just because you tricked it that it was an image. Sounds pretty lame and simple. It is lame and simple, but it's actually things to look for that are still pretty common. So,
Yeah, so it shouldn't be just looking at the extension of the file, right? So we were mentioning earlier that, a lot of pen tests, they can be very quick. You only have a week to assess or something. Say you have longer, and say incident response is a part of that. So, hey, is our MSSP doing what they're supposed to be doing? Are they alerting us on these attacks? So, a good way to do that for a black box approach is polymorphic, obfuscate, file extension, file wrapping. These are all buzzwords that you'll hear, and it gets kind of complex. So you want to make sure that you read up on how to do that, and so that you're just putting in say you're injecting something in the URL or into the parameter. Well, you can turn that into hex or there's some things out there you can just paste that into the tool and it'll obfuscate it for you. So you just paste that in there. So whatever the signatures are on the IDS or IPS that's tripping that alert, well, it's now blinded from it, right? So that's a good approach of doing it. Again, this takes a little bit more time and effort, but it is an excellent way to test your IDS and IPS as well.
Yeah. And that would be for a case where there is file upload, but it's actually looking at the contents of a file and it's not letting you upload just a basic web shell. This is where you would go and base 64 encode or other different ways to obfuscate that, and now it's not seeing it anymore and you still get your web shell.
Speaking of base 64 encode, if you're still using that for your authentication on your website, stop. Okay, you're like, I can't see my. It's got a bunch of random jarbled stuff there. It's base 64, people. It's not hard to decode.
Yep. Something we want to again stress, as I mentioned at the beginning, just starting. If you're just starting getting into this, you got to make sure that you're studying and understanding. When you click a button on a tool, you want to know what's actually happening. That way, if you use that tool against a client and something breaks and they say, well, what happened? If you say, well, I don't know, that's really bad. So you always want to understand what's going on behind the scenes. That way, if it's an environment where a particular attack or traffic could bring it down, you know not to use that tool. So just continue to study, understand what's going on. There's several free resources online, YouTube videos. SecurityTube is a great website. There's so many of them out there now.
When you guys are doing this too, setting up your own lab at home with some VMs. There's some vulnerable VMs out there. I know SANS has a lot of vulnerable.
OWASP has vulnerable VMs.
There's what is that? That's a very vulnerable application or something.
And damn vulnerable.
Yeah, damn vulnerable application. Exploitable. I mean, there's a lot of good resources out there to train. Brent was talking about knowing what that tool does. Well, how do you do that, right? If it's just a GUI and you're pointing and clicking, how do you know? Make sure you're turning your sniffers on. Have TCP dump or Wireshark or something running in the background. That way you can see the traffic. And you can also see the noise. Is there a lot of congestion on the internal network? Hey, there's a lot of garbage here coming from this IP or that IP, or I keep getting booted, or it's not accepting my request. These are things you can look at.
Yep. So then once you practice, and something I want to stress too, you don't ever want to use a tool or something you're not familiar with on a client site for the first time. That's just bad. I mean, if you break something again, you want to be able to explain to the client what you did to break the website. So you don't ever learn a tool or practice on a client's website. It's just a bad idea.
And when you download these tools too, I know because I've done it when I was a little younger. You're like, oh, I don't want to pay for this, so I'm going to see if there's another version of it somewhere. And I download it.
Suite or free Havage.
Yeah, you download it from somewhere's website, and it ends up being infected with malware or whatever, and you're trying to hack, and then they're hacking you, right? So make sure that you're testing these tools and you know what the legitimate sources, right?
Yep.
It's not just some crack tool that you downloaded off of Pirate Bay or Kickass or something.
So. And that's basically it for our talk. We want to make sure to leave some time if anybody has any questions. If you want to, you can ask us now, or you can catch us outside if you don't want to ask now. But that's basically it.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys, and thank you, Bill. I'm not sure where Bill is.
Bill,